Hey everybody, Dave here again. I have an exciting video for you today because we are going to go deep dive into OpenAI and how to implement it inside of a Microsoft Power App Canvas application. We're going to take this through beginning to end, and we're going to add a more complicated endpoint, which is really more along the lines of dealing with chat. It's a little bit different from completions and a lot different from the instruct. So if you're familiar with Azure OpenAI or OpenAI in general, this video should make a lot of sense for you. If you've not even played with OpenAI and you've not played with Azure's OpenAI, which essentially is one and the same, is that you're going to maybe have a hard time following this because you don't have the prerequisite knowledge. So I highly encourage you to watch this video once you've become a little bit more acclimated with how to use one of these API tools through OpenAI or Azure OpenAI, because everything else is built upon this. All right, so the first thing that you're seeing here is a Swagger definition file for a custom connector that I created. As you can tell up here at the top, custom OpenAI. It's just called OpenAI. And I have a couple of endpoints. Now, what I did originally is I took Robin Rosengruen's custom connector, and I left his original one in here for completions, but everything else I've added to since that, and I was using that as a base. I've left this name in here because I do have this one thing of note. Completions has gone away. You'll use this GPT Turbo Instruct to replace completions. Anything that you've got that's built currently on completions is going to die. It's a legacy. I believe it's January 2024. I don't know what date specifically or day on that date, but it just figured you got till the end of the year to fix it. Switch everything over to GPT Turbo Instruct and you should be just fine. All right, so what we're going to focus on this one is the completions and the chat. And the reason that I'm going to show this one, because it's the harder of the two. If you understand and can get this, you'll get everything else. So let's switch over into the application here, where we get into what it is that we'll be building, which is this. I'm going to go ahead and play this so that you can at least understand kind of what it is that we're building. So when you first start the application, you have a drop-down that just has system in it. So the idea here is that you have to tell the AI who it is. You've got to give it a purpose. Why does it exist? So I like to tell people that AI is so smart that it's stupid, in that it has a plethora of information, but it really doesn't know what it is, what its purpose is, and you know why it's here to help. So it's up to you to tell it through this initial system. Think of this as system initialization. So I'm just going to say something very generic like you are a helpful assistant, right? So something stupid simple. And at that point, I'm going to go ahead and submit it. Now what you're seeing here is a whole bunch of stuff. This is not meant to be a wow app. This is meant to be a geeky propeller head Power App developer, intermediate to advanced level skill. So we're using some stuff in here that, you know, hopefully you're not new to Power Apps. Otherwise, you're going to be very, very lost when you see the rest of the code here. But if you're at an intermediate or advanced level, then you should understand this. So after I've gone ahead and created this system initialization so it knows what its purpose is, I can ask a question. I have no idea how this is going to come. So basically what I've done here is I've initialized the system and then I've asked a question. But I wanted you to see a couple of things here. So as I'm going through this, right, I'm building an array, a collection. And inside of this collection, I've used a JSON function to convert this over to, you know, from a collection into something that I can use as JSON. But the collection in its collection format, as far as Power Apps is concerned, I'm just using a table and I'm displaying this information out here. Now what you see down here is what's called a payload. This is the payload that we're going to send to OpenAI, and I want to show you programmatically how to use the JSON function to convert a table into a usable JSON object, and then nest that JSON object, which is what you see here for messages, the nesting part actually is right here. And that is this that you see up here. And so then there's other stuff that goes in here that makes this dynamic. So for example, I can change the model, and I've got a couple different models that I've chosen. I have the temperature setting. I have some max tokens. Now I've left the nomenclature the exact same as it is in Azure OpenAI. If you were building a user interface for somebody, you want to take temperature to and change it with a word like creativeness, because as you go down, the creativeness gets less. As you go up, the creativeness increases, but the chance for hallucination also increases. So if you have something very matter of fact, you want to make sure that you restrict the creativeness and kind of like bolt it down a little bit so it doesn't get embellished too crazy and come up with some hallucination output. But if you say, hey, write me a story, and it needs to be creative, then you want to crank it all the way up. Tokens I've got set from a range of 250 to 200. Now, to be fair, each one of these has a different token size limit. I'm not going to get into that. Again, this goes back to me saying to you, you should really understand the model that you're using, understand the tokenization limit, because this does come into play. So I think I did something like happy medium, like 750 or something like that. We'll leave it at 883. But you see, as I've changed this number here, down here in this, watch this change. So as I change, all of this is dynamic, and above it you see temperature, right? So temperature down here, the value is changing, and so all of this is dynamic based payload creation. And so once you understand that, you can do it static, but I wanted to show you the hardest version of this. This way you can build administrative consoles, you can build on the idea, and you can kind of rapidly move forward through this. And so now that I've got my payload built, and I have a whole array of the conversation up to this point, you can actually start creating GPT-like or ChatGPT-like experiences. So now I'm going to actually send this off to the AI, but I'm going to send out this payload along with it. And then I'm going to capture that, add it to the collection, and then you can see it here. So if we click on it, now we can actually see the full response that we got from OpenAI. It says I'm an AI language model. I don't have to read to you. Let's see. So it doesn't really have an age. And then it just goes on, hey, how can I assist you today? Now, if I go ahead up here and I type another question and I submit it and add it to the stack and send it to AI, it's going to send the entire conversational thread up to this point, including what I ask it, including its response, although I didn't include it in the payload. So it is over here. So it's only going to have the context for the next question based on this. And so this is something that we'll go ahead and explore a little bit further on in this video. So now let's get into the nuts and bolts and let's see how I actually went ahead and created this. So now that we're here on the back end, I want to take you over to the application, specifically the property on start for the application. So you can see over here, we've got application, and then over here we've got on start. And then I've got 4 commands. So I'm doing 2 things with col messages, which is a collection. So first I'm clearing the collection and creating the collection. And then I'm initializing it with 1 row with the value for both the row column as well as the content column as blank, or just quote, quote. And then what I'm doing is I'm using the JSON function to take my collection, which essentially is an in-memory table. And what I'm going to do is I want to turn it into JSON. And I'm going to store that returned value in this variable. I always name my variables v, whatever I'm going to call it. That way, at least I know it's a variable. Collections, I always do like col for collection. And columns get somewhat interesting because we got columns over here in a table. I usually use like COLU so that I know it's a column. But in any event, I have stored off the returned result of this into a vtemp, and I'll show you where I'm using that in just a second. And then I have some modal pop-up windows that's inside of a container, and I simply just use a variable to toggle that on and off typically. All right, so I'll show you where I'm using that too as well. So that's the setup, application on start. Nothing heavy, nothing too exotic here. I also have a couple things on screen. And then I also have this container thing. So let's start at the end, right? vtoggle. So let me show you the container where I'm using this. Right now I have this icon, and I name it ICO for icon, settings, and it's a settings icon, and I do control click. What that does is it runs this toggle to true, and that shows the entire container. So I've got everything under this cont preview, cont for container, and then actually it should be cont settings. Here's container settings. Yep, here it is, sorry. And what I'm doing is everything inside of this container is all the controls and stuff. I'm simply just toggling the container itself so that whatever's inside goes away or is showed based on whatever the setting is. And then I've got some settings that we'll come back to in just a minute. And then I have a close button where I just set that toggle again to false. Could have set it to not to toggle instead of false. Either way, and then it's truly a toggle. But in any event, I've got then this interesting drop-down window that has items for the drop-down that are somewhat dynamic based on some condition. And so what I'm doing is I'm saying is I want you to look at the collection, and then I want you to get the first row out of that collection. Because remember, we initialize the collection at first with a blank row, essentially. It's a placeholder row. And the only reason I do that, again, is just so that there's some columns inside of there. But then I go back and we're going to clean this up a little bit later, and I'll show you how I do that. The other thing here is that I'm looking to make sure that that column is blank, and if it is, then I know I don't really have anything in this collection. It's pretty much just the way that it is. And I'm going to show system, and I'll talk about this in just a moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to application, and I'm going to run on start to kind of wipe this all out. So now you can see this is actually changed to just system because this is true. There's nothing in the collection. If you're not too familiar, you can come over to your collections. You can see one row, come to the ellipsis, and you can see I've got basically just an empty blank row. Okay. So that's what it's looking at. Now, the reason that there's system versus user and assistants, when you're using a chat object or a chat endpoint, which is what we're using here in this particular app to show you, because again, it's the harder of the set of items to use, is that we need to make sure that when initializing the system at first, we have to kind of give it a set of intelligence. In other words, think of primordial soup back in the day, and I don't know, you're a god and you're creating an entity or a being or something right out of this soup. And so the large language models are the primordial soup. They're so smart, in fact, they're stupid because they're so smart. The problem is, imagine if you had all the information in the universe and you could do anything, but, you know, in order to do what you do as a human being, you might do something that is non-humanistic, like, right? You might try to do something, but if you didn't know that you were human and you just had all this knowledge, you wouldn't necessarily know how to do anything very specific. And that's what the whole point of system initialization is. So the first row we always start with is system. And then we'll start off with something like your helpful assistant. And then we write this into the log. And as soon as we do that, now this is the item that's in the log. So if we go back over here to view, hit OK, view this table again, that blank row is gone. I'll show you how I clean that up in just a second. And then what I did is I wrote the first row, but I'm using the role of system. Now this only needs to be once, and it needs to be the first thing in the list so that you basically tell it what its role, what its purpose, what its persona is, okay? So now it knows it's just a helpful assistant. That means anything that I ask it, it should try to be as helpful as it can in responding. And so that's a good thing. Maybe I want it to be a sarcastic or a funny or a whatever chatbot. And I could have said that too as well. But the point is, this only happens one time. And now you can see that the drop-down then shows us user or assistant. And at this point, the user is used for the person interacting with the system. So I may say something like, who is... Okay, we'll form this as a proper question. So who's George Washington? So now we have the system initialization. We've got the user's question. Now the AI is going to provide a response, but when the AI responds, it's going to use the assistant role. We don't have to do this. I left it in here so that you could experiment. So you could create a couple of turns of the user and the assistant. So the user's basically the human and the assistant is the AI. And I left it in here so you could do a couple of rounds, because with the chat, you can build this in context, build this in memory. And this is one of the things to wrap your head around too that you need to be aware of. And this is in traditional development, this is what developers are really struggling right now to have a hard time to solve. So you see this battle of token limits on there. So you just heard OpenAI today is, as of the date of this recording, 11.8. I think it was 11.6, maybe 11.5, somewhere earlier this week. OpenAI had a plethora of announcements. Up until that announcement, Claude had 100K on their model, and it was the largest model that was available out there. And in addition to that, there was now this announcement about GPT having 125K tokens. So now it's the biggest public LLM on the market right now. And so why does that matter? So it matters because of this. This is what this 100K is referring to, or the 125K is referring to. This information, every time I throw something in here, every time I do a turn, it's more and more and more information. It's a buffer. It's a memory buffer that gives context to what it's talking about. Once you've exceeded the buffer, what do you do? And this is the part of the problem on what developers are doing to solve it. Now, there's all different kinds of ways out of scope of this particular class, but just know by and large that for using Power Apps in this context, depending on what it is that you're doing, you may or may not need a larger context. And so right now I'm using the main one that's here based on, what is it, GPT Turbo 1106. If we go over to the OpenAI documentation, which is over here, let's go down to documentation. Let's see if we can find information on models. We're using the 3.5, so it's 16,000 tokens on this one that I've chosen. And again, if you just want to look at this, this is GPT 3.5 Turbo 1106. And if we look at the setting, it's GPT 3.5 Turbo 1106. Now you can see I hand typed these in here. You can hand type them. There's a dynamic way of doing it. I'm not going to get into that in this video either, but this is good enough to suffice for you to get in and do what you need to do and learn what it is that I'm trying to teach you here. So with that being said, now you have a couple of other areas within the application. But before I go there, I told you I was going to show you the submit button. So when I put information in the box here and I have this item up here chosen, I'm simply just patching the collection. Okay, so actually there's a couple of things that's going on here. Let me kind of make this much bigger. And so the first thing I'm doing is I'm patching the collection. I'm creating a brand new record. I'm not updating anything, so I'm just using the defaults. And then for the role, what I'm doing is I'm lower casing. Now this is important. Now in the drop down, I wanted it to read, non-case sensitive, or I don't want it programmatic. I wanted a capital U for user. I wanted a capital S for system, and so on and so forth. So I'm lowering the value of that so that it is according to the way that the API wants it, which is all lowercase. If you don't lowercase it, you're going to get an error. So just being consistent, this is why this function's in here. And I'm taking the dynamic role from the selected value. So this is the drop role of the selected value. And this role value is coming from this guy right here. So this is the role value, and it's whatever the selected item is. You see how U is capitalized, and I've got capital A for assistant, capital S. Well, I'm lowering all of that. All right, so back over to here with all of that being said, and then I'm taking the text value from the text message area, that's this box behind the scenes here, this guy, and I'm taking that information out, and I'm simply just writing it to these two columns that's in memory. It's not even a permanent storage database. It's a collection, in-memory collection. Okay, and now this is where I'm cleaning up that first row, and I'm just putting there as an if, okay? And now you might be tempted to say, hey, David, what about performance? Why don't you put that in a concurrent function? And normally that would be good because there is no dependency per se on what I'm doing here. In other words, I don't need to take some expected result or have to have some result in place to finish before I can do this next one. theoretically I could do it. The problem though is I'm using call messages here and call messages there. And when I try to wrap that up in a concurrent function, that's not a good thing, because now I'm trying to do two things to the same table. One's going to lock the row while it's writing. Another one's going to try to delete stuff out of that while it's doing the write. And so it's just not a good idea to do that. So just leave it separate. And matter of fact, Power Apps, I think, will even complain at you. And then to finish things up here, I'm simply just building, or rebuilding, I should say, the vtemp variable by running this JSON function. And I'm using the collection, and I'm simply just giving some specific instructions to indent4 to give it a little bit of formatting. And so now you can see that output right here. Here's the vtemp. So you can see here again under this. Let's go here, set vtemp, right? There it is. And so I'm just using the variable here to provide that. Now that's what the JSON function does for you. Again, it takes a table and turns it into JSON for you. All right, now over here things get a little bit trickier. Not too bad. And I'm using the trim function just because if there was any leading spaces on the front or the back end, I'm just trimming them out. But this is the bulk of the actual payload request. And so what I'm doing is I'm saying I'm providing it a model. I'm providing it that group of messages. Okay, so that's this stuff right here in the blue area with the red text. And inside of that, I'm also then providing a temperature. Now you see the slide value divided by 10, and I also have max tokens, a slide value. So if we get to that, where those are, that's this item here that you've seen. So these are the sliding values. And so what you're seeing here in these values right there, then this is what's dynamically being used here. So I want you to look down here where it says max tokens, down here at the very bottom. Here, let me play this. Probably you'll. Okay, so keep an eye on this guy as I slide this up here. See, this number and this number match. But as I move the slider, this is all going to dynamically change. So you see these are happening in lockstep. So this is what I'm talking about with regards to dynamic values in building a dynamic payload. So I can use the controllers to set these values in the payload. And so that's how I'm doing it. Now you may be saying, why are you dividing it by 10? The reason is because I have a value that needs to be passed from either 0.1 all the way up to 1. And so I can't do that. The slider only accepts whole values. So what I'm doing is I'm doing from 1 to 10, and then I'm dividing it by 10, so I can get a fraction of that to be 0.1, 0.2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and all the way up to 1, which equals 10. So that's why I'm dividing it by there. It was a little tricky to make sure that you remember to do that, because the first thing you might be inclined to, oh my God, I can't get my slider to 0.05. How am I going to pull that off? Well, it's okay. Just use whole numbers, and then for your values where you need to use them downstream, just make sure you convert it on the fly by using a simple math calculation of division. Okay, so that being said, now I have this entire payload here. And now I'm actually ready to go out to the internet, and I want to present this to OpenAI. So here's what I'm doing. I'm coming over here to my data, and I have a in-memory collection, and then I have the custom connector that I showed you earlier. And so what I'm doing up here is I'm capturing the value that's being returned from OpenAI in this variable called vReturn. And then I'm sending along the request, which is OpenAI.chat. Now this is coming from this custom connector that I showed you earlier. And now instead of using just JSON, I need to parse the JSON, because what I need to do is make sure that it is a untyped object, and I need to make sure that the payload goes out exactly as needed. And then I'm just taking the text value that you see here on screen, and I'm passing it into the parse JSON function, which creates this untyped object, which is what it needs and what it is expected. And then you'll see down here, I'm using the vReturn, right? And now I'm patching that collection because I need to capture the response that I get back from the AI. And that response is being held in this object called vReturn. To get to it, I need to get to the first record of the object choices, And then from the choices, I need to get to the messages. And then specifically, I need to capture off the role. And then I need to capture out the actual content. And then I need to write that into the in-memory collection so that now this will be the last row. So I'm going to go ahead and press the Alt button and press Send to AI. And this should initialize the AI and start sending. You see the dots going along the top. Okay, I got it. And this time I got all kinds of weird stuff. Okay, yeah, I think I hit it twice, and so it responded twice. And so anyway, George Washington was the first president. If I hold down the Alt key, actually, let me just play it again. So I have another hidden modal window here, and I can also hover over it to see it. But if I click on it, I got this little pop-up box. And so this is what the AI responded with. And so I'm now able to capture that off into the collection. So if you're going to create a chat app, this is how you do it. You capture off the question, you write it into an in-memory collection. You need to build your payload constantly behind the scenes, and then you'll pass that into OpenAI so that all of that information is passed along again and again and again into the next request. Now, the one thing you'll notice that the response didn't show up here, and I did it on purpose. And I'm going to give you an opportunity to, if you'd like to create and make a donation, I will send you this file so that you can use this to accelerate your development of your own chat application using this free connector that I have here that I created. It's on my GitHub, but this actual file that you're seeing here, I'll go ahead and I'll download it. I'll give you the link on screen as well as in the description below if you'd like to make a donation. Any donation will work, and then once you make the donation of any size, it'll go ahead and email you the file, and then you can just go ahead and import that into whatever it is you're trying to do, and then you'll have the code so that you can copy and paste it into your own apps. All right, so that being said, I need to show you now how to fix this part, but the file that's going to be from the donation isn't going to include this part. And the reason is you need to get some hands-on, and this will be a very easy first step for you to do, is to fix the file with this one common problem. This will get you started and get you comfortable, at least working through it. And you'll be able to rewind this video a couple of times to see what's happening. And then through experience of either you messing it up 1 or 2 times or no times, maybe you get it right the first time, that's great. Then you'll have that experience, and then you should be able to continue to go and build and build and build upon that. All right, so the problem now that we are going to need to solve is we need to capture off the AI response so that it updates both this variable that we're calling vtemp over here, and then we also need to redo this over here to make it included as well. So how are we going to do this? The question or the answer might be as simple as on this button. We can put the code right here on this button, and we already have the code pretty much, or not all of it, but at least some of it. And so I can run this piece of code right here, and I can add it to the send AI. So I'm going to put my semicolon here, and I'm going to go ahead and paste this in. So let's just undo this, make sure that we format all of this other stuff here like this. And so now it's at least consistent. Let's remove the formatting. I'm going to keep them on separate lines, at least so that you'll be able to follow along here. Somehow I got myself spun around. Okay, yep, set vtemp. And we're using Nicole messages. All right, so that's there. So we've got this rebuilt. Now what we need to do is rebuild this payload. So to rebuild the payload, all we're going to have to do is let me think through this just a quick second, because right now I'm building this inside of here like this, but unfortunately this isn't a good approach at this stage. So essentially what I need to do is really probably rebuild this into a variable and then rerun a command to update the variable, and then use the text in this text box to simply update the variable. So I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to make a really quick change, and then I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. I'm about to make some changes here, so let me show you what I did. So what I did is, let me remove the formatting so at least I can keep a lot of this stuff here, and I'll redo this out so you can really see the pieces of it a little bit better. I guess it's pretty much the same as how I had it. But in any event, what I added was this. There we go. That's where it is. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm building this vtemp. And the reason I'm rebuilding the vtemp is because that's this guy up here in the blue. Okay? Then, after I'm building the vtemp, because I need this built first, because I'm using it dynamically down here. Then I created a brand new variable called vpayload. And so in vpayload, I'm then building the payload dynamically, and I'm using this vtemp that I created previously. And then down here, I'm now just referencing for the text the payload, or vpayload. And then finally, I need to come over here now that I thought about it, and I need to just take this out right here because I'm no longer, I could leave it that way, but I'm just going to use the vpayload since I now have that here. And so I can simplify that there as well. All right, so I'm going to run the application on start to clear all of this up. I'm going to start from the beginning, and with any luck, let's just hope this thing works. So go ahead, save it out. All right, let's play this. Again, we are now empty. We're starting with system. Let's do you are a, no, not a question. All right, you're a helpful assistant. We're building that. Okay, so I know the function worked because I see that this has changed. I also see that you're a helpful assistant. That also changed here. Then I went ahead and actually I need to double check something because as we go through, I want to make sure that I take this and this function right here. And I'm going to copy it. I don't think I added it here. Okay, I only have one version of it. So I'm going to delete that. I'm going to paste that here. Whew. Thank God I double checked that or it wouldn't work. All right, save it again. Now I know it's going to work. And so we're rebuilding this. We've got this. It's based on the variable. I can see from the variable it all looks good. I'm going to make sure that my values are dynamic. And they're not. So this is broken. And the reason it's broken is because it is simply no longer using what was previously a static. So we're going to have to make some changes to this. So in order to make the changes, we're going to have to come back over here. And this is unfortunate. So we're going to have to we're going to copy out this piece of code. I'm going to enable this to see it. And then for this slider, I'm going to see if it has an onChange event. And it does have an onChange. Okay? So we're going to build the onChange event from here. And this is the temperature that I'm dealing with. So let's see here. I'm already inside of this slider temp value. So at this point, I think it'll work as is. Let's just see. All right, so let's play this. So with any luck, keep an eye down here. Okay, looks like that is working. Cool. So now all we need to do, I was worried about, here's what I was thinking inside my head, just so that you know why I was kind of pause with what I was saying. So instead of using slide.temp, I could also use self, this self reference to self. Whatever this is here, to make this a little easier to read. Let's add some spacing. All right, so in this case, I know that I'm on the object itself. I could have used just self, so I'll leave it like that. We can let's undo this. Well, I'm just going to copy out what I had over here again, because that was the original. If I could get to the clicking. Okay. All right, so we know that's there. That all works good and well. Now we need to also do the on change here as well. All right, that's all being said and done. Good deal. All right, so now with any luck, we should now have some additional sliding values that'll happen. Doesn't happen as nice and clean as it did before, where literally we could see stuff happening in real time. It has to wait until I let go of the mouse for the change to take effect, because we are using the on change event, and it doesn't actually physically change until I let go of the mouse button. That then triggers the on action. All right, so that is solved. That is now working. So now we have a dynamic content or context back again. And now we need to ask the user question. Who is and let's do that. Okay, so now we have the context of Ronald Reagan. Now we're asking who's Ronald Reagan. All right, now we're going to send this to the AI, and let's see, not only does it show up here in the context, but it should hopefully rebuild and change and update the payroll. Okay, so we do see the context, and we can see that the role is assistant, so that is now in the history. So it is now baked into the payroll, and if we, payload, not payroll, sorry. And if we see the text here, we can see that the text is the same that's being provided here as well. So I would say by and large, this is good. So again, we're going to go ahead and include the, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to include two files. I'm going to include the corrected version, and then I'm going to include the version that I had before the correction. And that way you'll have both. You can try to attempt to fix it on your own, as you saw that I did here in the video. And then you can also use the finalized output to, verify, hey, this is what it looks like in code, and that way you don't have to go through all of this. All right, so this was somewhat of a long video, but it's still less than 1 hour in total, which is a pretty good amount of time. Hopefully you learned something. You'll be able to go out and create something fantastic like a chatbot. And if you use the same technique with the other options, I'll create other videos and series for the easier to use versions of this, but I wanted to knock out the harder one first. That way this will give you an idea of how to use all of this, and if you can have great success with this, then you'll have great success with the rest of them. That's it for this video, everybody. We'll see you in the next one. Have a good one. Bye-bye.